welcome to the firm. On the show this week, is GST finally about to become a reality? And what the government hasn't been able to do to fight black money, the tribunal has done. 4 years after it was to first go online, we now have a new date for India's move to GST. April 2016, or so hopes the government and probably even the empowered committee of state finance ministers. The buzz, though, has definitely returned. Finance Minister Arun Jaitley saying that he expects to table the revised constitutional amendment bill for GST this winter session of Parliament. Newspaper headlines are once again discussing revenue neutral rates, place of supply rules and state compensation. And GST experts are back on TV to tell you whether India is on the right path or not. Well, two of them join me this weekend on the firm. Sachin Menon of KPMG and Madhavan, formerly with EY, now an independent expert as well as consultant to the Finance Ministry. Gentlemen, to both of you, a very warm welcome. I'm breaking this discussion up into two themes. How far have we come? Have we made real progress or not? And therefore, is 2016 likely to be a reality or not? Now, within the first theme, Sachin, I want to start talking to you by the very first important number, which is the annual turnover threshold limit for GST registration. The empowered committee has stuck with the 10 lakh limit, even though the government has suggested raising that threshold to 25 lakh rupees. Will 10 lakhs be a good threshold limit, or will the total cost of getting those 10 lakh rupee turnover traders to comply be totally not worth the revenue earned?
Well, I think this is perhaps a climb down on the past position that even the subcommittee appointed by the empowered committee has recommended a 25 lakhs threshold limit as a minimum threshold limit. And now that this 10 lakhs proposal is actually going to create a lot of administrative issues. And not only that, this 10 lakhs means pretty much every trader is covered. And you will find a lot of opposition from these groups who are going under this 10 lakh limit.
Yes. So
the point is that if you look at the revenue trend in the country, it's an 80-20 principle. That is 20% of this industry is contributing towards 80% of the revenue, and 80% is contributing only 20%. And it is empowered committee's own admission, by reducing the limit from 25 lakhs to 10 lakhs, the number of dealers will go up by 60%, which means that much administrative cost, and that much effort for managing all this, and it end of the day doesn't mean anything to the government. Maybe they may end up collecting the money which would be either equal to what they are going to spend,
the cost of compliance,
or maybe spending a little more than what you collect.
Okay, so you seem to be in favor of 25 lakhs. Madhavan, if GST is supposed to be all-inclusive and it's this one tax that is finally going to make a large number of Indians taxpayers, so to speak, then isn't 10 lakhs worth the effort?
Oh, not at all.
Okay.
And Menaka, before I proceed to respond, let me make the point here that all of the progress on GST, and it is commendable, the progress, is largely independent of views of industry, organized or unorganized sectors. So this is something that the administration has set out as what it believes to be an appropriate GST. So that's the caveat. In other words, the stakeholders such as industry are not yet on board, and they haven't been privy to any of these discussions. As to the threshold, which is the initial point that you're making, well, 25 is itself an inadequate number, and I concur with all that Sachin talks about in terms of cost of compliance and administration of those small taxpayers. Bear in mind that there are two elements to this discussion of thresholds. One is to register them ahead of the payment of the actual GST, and then to require them to pay the GST beyond that particular subsequent level of turnover. So we are talking about a very low threshold, not only for the registration itself, but then for the payment of the tax. And the initial number on the table, if my memory serves me right, because it was several years ago, was not 25, it was 40. And when the initial recommendation went from the empowered committee to the finance ministry, the ministry requested a relook, and the empowered committee has done the relook and reiterated its stand that it ought to be 10. So clearly, a very low threshold, and world over you will not have, relative to the taxpayer base, such a low threshold.
Let me come to the other very important number, even more important than these thresholds, which is the revenue neutral rate. Now it seems that the Empowered Committee subcommittee has proposed a 26.7% revenue neutral rate, Sachin. That works out to the state GST coming in at 13.9 and the central GST coming in at 12.8%. I'm not sure if this is the final rate, because the other thing we hear is that the NIPFB has been asked to recalculate the rates, you know. But at 26.7% or 27%, aren't we working with too high a GST rate?
So it is indeed, prima facie, that rate is actually create a lot of hurdles in implementation of GST, because I'm sure that there will be opposition coming from the industry itself to say that at this rate perhaps GST would be workable or not.
Yeah.
They also have given some provision for merit rate. Okay. Merit rate is supposed
a lower rate
for essential.
Okay.
For example, now for medicine or maybe some of the food items, 12%. So if you are taking out that 12%, what is the rate? And then that is what is 27%. And the other one is that without, if every rates are uniform, single, then what is the rate, which is coming to almost about 23-24%.
Okay, fine.
So there are two ways that it is done.
But 23 is, so one minute. If we were not to adopt a merit rate, and therefore the revenue neutral rate would come down to 23 or 24%, keeping in mind the calculations of 26.7%, would that be more acceptable?
It will still be high.
Both numbers are too high?
It will still be high.
Okay.
Because this entire calculation didn't take into consideration what is the kind of additional revenues generated, because some of those traders or the dealers who are so far not on records coming into the GST mainstream is not considered, which is considered to be almost 1/3 of the total tax collection which is collected.
Fair enough. In fact, Madhavan, Sachin was telling me that the 13th Finance Commission recommendations suggested a 12% revenue neutral rate, keeping in mind exactly the point Sachin had made, which is that the tax net widens through an imposition of GST, and therefore the total revenue collected goes up. 12% and 27%, that would lead me to a conclusion that we've really not made any progress on the most key aspect of GST, which is the revenue neutral rate.
Very true, very depressing but true, Menaka, because let us understand the premise and the promise of the GST under which this whole initiative began many, many years ago. The idea was to broaden the tax base, and therefore, as a corollary to broadening the tax base, you moderate the tax rate. In other words, the idea was to broaden it from what the base was, which is admittedly narrow today, and therefore moderate it from an aggregate of whatever it is, 25-26% across the excise, service tax and the VAT tax aggregate, to a much more moderate tax rate, expectations being around 14 to 16, if not 12 as per the Finance Commission, 13th Finance Commission. And therefore, if we are now suggesting that we keep some large categories of products out, and we are happy to talk about petroleum particularly, but equally alcohol and tobacco, these are very significant product categories from a revenue collection standpoint of the states, then, and if you keep those products out and then stay with the 25 or 27% aggregate taxation under the GST, then what is the premise and the promise of the GST? You are negating the entire element or the ability of the GST to foster efficiencies and productivity with the economic system, so that you get to the ultimate goal, which is, and bear in mind the GST is a means to an end, the end being to get the GDP to a double-digit rate of growth over a period of time, at least in the medium term, if not in the short term. That premise clearly will not happen if we continue with the 27% aggregate tax and we keep several product categories outside the tax net.
Now, fair enough. I think you've answered my last point that I wanted to talk about to gauge how far we've come, and that is the exclusion of petroleum, alcohol and tobacco products. Sachin, I'll get your comment in then on the entire list of issues that we've spoken about, because Madhavan has already touched upon the fact that if you keep so many products out, you're really not implementing GST in the way you should. Have we truly made progress in the last couple of years that GST has been, let's say, under the radar, so to speak? Because that will then lead me to answers for my next question, which is, can we make it to the April 2016 deadline? So
there are some fundamental issues to be finally sorted out. But generally, if you speak, they have made a lot of progress in this, because there are deliberation happening.
But they've made all the progress without consulting industry.
That's right. So from this perspective, if you look at compensation was one of the issue, which is more or less sorted out. It was one of the main issue. Now, constitutional amendment was another issue, where they said that we have to keep petroleum in the amendment.
So states wanted the exclusion of petroleum to be included in the constitutional amendment,
which is shot down more or less. They agreed to that.
Yeah.
Now, as far as tobacco is concerned, tobacco is in now. Alcohol is decided that it will remain outside.
Okay.
And whereas wherever these are high duty items, white tax item like petroleum or you call alcohol, the central government's proposal is that you collect that under a different tax in addition to GST.
All right, fair enough. I think this takes me to my next and final question, Madhavan, which is that will we make it to that April 2016 deadline? Is it realistic? Now, under that, I identified 3 things that we must be able to do, which is to get all the states to agree on a common design for GST. And I'm not sure whether that's already happening, because just a few months ago, we had Gujarat raise the issue of perpetual CST collection in order to protect their revenues to some extent, right? Then you've got the state compensation issue. I don't know how much progress we've made on the center and the states agreeing on that, but I did read that the finance minister said that the first tranche of compensation will be discussed in the winter session. And the third bit is the national IT framework, which is the only area where I seem to get the best responses, where everybody says, yes, considerable amount of progress has been made. Are we ready for April 2016?
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by ready for a GST and what nature of the beast, so to speak. If you ask me the question, will the center and the states agree to a uniform GST design, I think the answer is yes. There has been considerable progress, and I agree with Sachin when he believes
Gujarat
that
notwithstanding, Madhavan? Gujarat notwithstanding,
Gujarat notwithstanding, Tamil Nadu and the marginal states who sort of are playing a game of brinkmanship for a variety of reasons. But I nevertheless believe, Menaka, that between now and April, the states and the center clearly will see eye to eye, because the center has made a lot of concessions in terms of exclusions, in terms of thresholds and so on and so forth. So the center is more than meeting the states halfway on that model. Now the question then is, what nature of the GST do we expect to bring into being in April of 2016? And if the present 27% aggregate GST rate, with the exclusion of several product categories and with all the other elements of the GST design, which we do not have the time to talk about today, if that is the understanding, then I'm afraid the version or the particular kind of GST that we will bring about, which is a dual GST, bear in mind, which is not typically well known across the world, which is used to a unified GST. So we are grappling with the dimensions and the challenges surrounding a dual GST, not to speak of these other design elements. So we might have a GST which is imperfect, unfinished, and perhaps a halfway house.
The Indian GSTs in many ways are unique. I don't think anywhere in the world we have a dual GST as we are doing right now, with so many exclusions and exceptions, etc. So we will never have a perfect GST. That's a fact. Now, if you wait for a perfect GST to come and then introduce GST, perhaps you will not see the light of GST will not see the light of the day for next one more decade. So maybe the good idea would be to start with GST and involve industry, take the feedback, as Madhavan said, even 80% if you get it right, that's good enough.
But are we on track to get even 80% right? Because Madhavan seems to be saying halfway house, which means we've got only 50% right.
Yeah, so I would imagine that now most of the suggestions made by this empowered committee, the centre is perhaps not going to accept it. That's what I am getting, because the finance secretary has conveyed that this may not be possible.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to leave it there in this stock-taking discussion on GST. I'm sure we'll come back to you in following weeks as more develops on this front and as we head into the winter session. Sachin, Madhavan, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to take a quick break on the film. When we come back, what the government hasn't been able to do to fight black money, the tribunal has done.